On a frigid winter night, New York was enveloped in a thick fog that cloaked the city in a shroud of mystery. The atmosphere seemed ordinary to most, but Detective John Bradley knew better. In this city, silence often harbored dark secrets. John sat in his small office at the 7th Precinct, sipping his bitter black coffee as he watched raindrops slowly slide down the window, casting fleeting shadows on the wet pavement below. The quiet of the night whispered of impending danger, a tension that John had grown all too familiar with over the years. The phone rang suddenly, its sharp tone cutting through the stillness like a blade. John reached for the receiver with deliberate calm, sensing that this call was different from the routine inquiries that usually came through at this hour. A woman's voice, trembling and fragile, echoed through the line. "I need your help. I think my husband is cheating on me," she said, her words laced with deep anxiety. John raised an eyebrow, recognizing the desperation in her voice. This wasn't the kind of woman who would call the police over a mere suspicion. "What's your name?" he asked, his tone steady, aiming to soothe her nerves. "My name is Elizabeth Kendall, wife of Richard Kendall, the businessman," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper, as if she feared someone might overhear. The name hit John like a cold splash of water. Richard Kendall wasn't just any businessman. He was one of the most powerful and wealthiest men in New York, with connections that ran deep into the city's political and financial underworld. There was something in Elizabeth's tone that hinted at a much more complicated and dangerous situation than it appeared on the surface. "What makes you think he's cheating?" John inquired, his professional curiosity now piqued, but tinged with a cautious reserve. Elizabeth hesitated for a moment, as if weighing her words carefully before speaking. "He's changed so much in the past few months. He spends hours away from home, and when he comes back he's drenched in scents I've never smelled before. His phone is always off or busy, and when I confront him he brushes it off with jokes. But I'm scared, detective, not just for our marriage but for my life." As Elizabeth spoke, a dark image began to form in John's mind, an image of a man leading a double life, hiding secrets that could be devastating. "Is there anything else? Anything unusual you've noticed?" John pressed, hoping to uncover more layers to this enigmatic case. "Yes," Elizabeth replied, her voice dropping even lower. "A week ago I found a small bag hidden in the trunk of his car, filled with cash. When I asked him about it, he said it was just part of a business deal. But I didn't believe him. Something is very wrong." A thrill of anticipation surged through John as he listened. This was no ordinary case of marital infidelity. It was the beginning of a mystery steeped in deception and peril. John agreed to take on the investigation, promising discretion, but he knew that stepping into Richard Kendall's world could be fraught with danger. This was more than a mere affair. It was the start of a labyrinthine puzzle that might threaten the lives of anyone who ventured too close to its dark heart. The following morning, Detective John Bradley began his inquiry into the elusive Richard Kendall. His first stop was the opulent office that Richard occupied in one of the city's tallest skyscrapers. The sleek, glass tower stood as a testament to Kendall's power and wealth, and John couldn't help but feel a twinge of anticipation as he stepped into the building. The luxurious lobby was buzzing with activity, a stark contrast to the grim task at hand. John was greeted by Sarah Miller, Richard's efficient and poised office manager. Despite her professional demeanor, there was a flicker of unease in her eyes when John casually inquired about Richard's recent whereabouts. "He had several meetings outside the office," she responded, her voice steady but her gaze a little too calculated. "But he didn't specify the locations." John sensed that there was more to her story, but pressing her further would likely close doors rather than open them. He thanked her politely and made a mental note to dig deeper into her role in Kendall's life. Unwilling to rely solely on second-hand information, John decided to shadow Richard Kendall himself. Over the next few days, he observed Richard's movements, noting the places he frequented. His attention was particularly drawn to a small, unassuming cafe nestled in the heart of the city's old quarter, far from the prying eyes of the affluent circles Richard usually moved in. There, Richard was often seen in the company of a striking blonde woman. She was elegant and composed, her every move exuding an air of secrecy. Their interactions were far too intimate for business, but too restrained to be a passionate affair. One crisp autumn day, as Detective John Bradley continued his routine surveillance of Richard Kendall, something out of the ordinary occurred. Instead of heading to the familiar cafe, Richard steered his sleek black car towards the outskirts of the city, navigating through a labyrinth of deserted streets. The further they drove, the more the city's bustling energy faded into an eerie stillness. John followed at a safe distance, his curiosity piqued and his senses on high alert. Richard eventually pulled up to a dilapidated house on the edge of a long-abandoned neighborhood. The house, with its peeling paint and sagging roof, looked as though it hadn't seen life in years. It stood alone among overgrown weeds and rusted fences, the perfect hiding spot for something, or someone, that didn't want to be found. John parked his car a few blocks away and approached the house on foot, moving cautiously, making sure to stay in the shadows. He watched as Richard got out of his car, glanced around nervously, and hurried up the creaking steps to the front door. For a moment, Richard hesitated, his hand hovering over the door handle, as if sensing the weight of the decision he was about to make. Then, with one last wary look over his shoulder, he disappeared inside. John waited, counting the seconds before deciding to follow. The air around the house was thick with tension, and the silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant caw of a crow. He knew he was stepping into a potential danger zone, but his instinct pushed him forward. He approached the front door cautiously, testing the handle, and found it unlocked. The door creaked loudly as it swung open, revealing a dimly lit interior cloaked in dust and shadows. The interior of the house was as neglected as its exterior, with furniture covered in dusty sheets and cobwebs hanging from the ceiling corners. But what caught John's attention was the table in the center of the room. Scattered across it were papers, photographs, and what appeared to be maps. He moved closer, careful not to disturb anything, and began examining the items on the table. The photographs were of people John didn't recognize, grim, serious faces captured in candid moments. The papers included addresses and scribbled notes, some of them partially burned, as if someone had tried to destroy them in haste. But the maps were what truly unsettled John. They highlighted specific locations in the city, areas that were known for their high security and exclusivity. John's mind raced as he pieced together the implications. This wasn't just about a philandering husband. Richard Kendall was involved in something far more dangerous, something that involved powerful people and secretive meetings in remote, forgotten places. The evidence before him pointed to a conspiracy, a shadowy operation that went beyond mere infidelity. The stakes had just been raised significantly. As he turned to leave, a cold chill ran down John's spine. He had the distinct, unsettling sensation that he was being watched. Spinning around, he scanned the dim room, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. The house was empty, at least it seemed that way. Yet the feeling persisted, gnawing at him like an itch he couldn't scratch. John quickly exited the house, his pulse quickening. Outside, the world seemed too quiet, the silence unnerving. Was it paranoia, or had someone really been watching him? He couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone, that Richard Kendall wasn't the only one under surveillance. As the days passed, John's investigation grew increasingly perilous. Every new piece of information he uncovered seemed to deepen the mystery rather than clarify it. It became clear that someone was determined to keep the truth buried, and that the risks of digging further were mounting. Weeks of relentless investigation and covert surveillance had brought Detective John Bradley closer to unraveling the intricate web of deception surrounding Richard Kendall. Through his dogged pursuit, John uncovered a dark secret. Richard was deeply entangled in a clandestine money laundering operation, and the mysterious woman he had been meeting with was not just a lover but an accomplice in his crimes. John believed he was on the brink of a major breakthrough, an arrest that would bring Richard and his partner in crime to justice. But just as he prepared to make his move, fate dealt an unexpected and brutal hand. One evening, the police received a distressing call. A body had been discovered at the very same dilapidated house John had surveilled for weeks. The address sent a jolt of recognition through him, and he raced to the scene, his mind swirling with ominous possibilities. When John arrived at the grim location, he was met with a scene that sent chills down his spine. There, lying in a pool of blood, was the lifeless body of Elizabeth Kendall, Richard's wife. The brutality of the murder was shocking. Elizabeth had been savagely attacked, her once serene face now a mask of terror frozen in death. The sight left John reeling, and the implications of this discovery shattered his initial theories. This was the moment the investigation took a sinister and unforeseen turn. It was no longer a simple case of financial crime. Something far more treacherous was at play. John realized he had stumbled into a labyrinth of deceit, where nothing was as it seemed. The presence of Elizabeth's body raised more questions than it answered. Had she discovered Richard's illicit activities, becoming a victim of his betrayal? Or was there an even more dangerous game afoot? One that involved a third party with motives darker than he had imagined? As the grisly details of the case began to unfold, John found himself doubting everything and everyone. His trust in his own instincts wavered as he came to understand that he was being played from all sides. The more he probed into Richard's life, the more he felt like a pawn in a deadly chess game, one that had been rigged from the start. With every step closer to the truth, the shadows surrounding the case grew darker, and John's own life became increasingly imperiled. The murder of Elizabeth Kendall marked the beginning of a new treacherous phase in the investigation. Richard was swiftly arrested, the evidence against him seemingly damning. Yet, John couldn't shake the gnawing suspicion that this case was far from straightforward. There was something profoundly unsettling about the whole situation, something that suggested Richard might not be the true killer. John delved deeper into Richard's past, uncovering a tangled web of connections to powerful, shadowy figures within the city's underworld. These were men with blood on their hands, men known for their ruthlessness and their willingness to eliminate anyone who posed a threat to their clandestine operations. It became evident that Richard was merely a cog in a much larger and more dangerous machine. As John edged closer to uncovering the full extent of this conspiracy, he began to feel the weight of unseen eyes upon him. In the end, after a relentless chase and a series of high-stakes investigations, John Bradley uncovered the shocking identity of the true murderer, someone he had never once suspected. It was Richard Kendall's partner in crime who had brutally slain Elizabeth, but the revelation didn't stop there. There was another, more insidious figure pulling the strings from behind the scenes, a mastermind hidden in plain sight. The person everyone believed to be a victim turned out to be the puppet master orchestrating the entire deadly game. Elizabeth, far from being a helpless wife caught in her husband's web of deceit, had discovered Richard's involvement in the money laundering operation, and had coldly decided to exploit this knowledge for her own gain. She had conspired with Richard's partner to eliminate him, intending to take control of the entire operation. But as with all well-laid plans, things had gone horribly wrong. In a final nail-biting confrontation, John came face to face with the killer in a fight that would determine the outcome of everything he had been working towards. The tension in the air was suffocating as they exchanged blows. In the dimly lit warehouse where Richard had hidden his ill-gotten gains, shadows danced across the walls, and the sound of metal clashing against metal echoed through the cavernous space. John's every nerve was on edge, his heart pounding in his chest as the truth unfolded before him like a grotesque play. Just when it seemed that John would finally bring the killer to justice, a sinister twist emerged. Elizabeth herself appeared, armed and dangerous, revealing her true nature. The cunning smile on her face was the last piece of the puzzle falling into place. She had manipulated everyone, including her own partner, to achieve her ends. But greed and betrayal know no loyalty. In a climactic showdown, Elizabeth turned on her accomplice, shooting him in cold blood before turning the gun on John. She was about to make her final move when fate intervened. The very person who had been hunting John from the shadows, the hired assassin who had tried to kill him earlier, emerged from the darkness, his allegiance having shifted in a way John could never have predicted. The assassin's bullet found its mark, and Elizabeth crumpled to the ground, her reign of terror ending in the very place where it had begun. As Elizabeth lay dying, a twisted smile still playing on her lips, she whispered her final words to John, words that sent a chill down his spine. "In this world, trust is a weapon, and I used it well." The story closed with John standing amidst the wreckage of broken lives and shattered truths. The chaos and destruction left by the web of deceit had scarred everyone involved, leaving them to pick up the pieces of a world where trust was the deadliest of weapons. The final scene left a lingering question in the minds of all who survived. In a world filled with shadows and betrayal, can anyone ever be truly innocent? The curtain fell on the story, but the haunting echoes of Elizabeth's betrayal would remain, leaving the audience on the edge of their seats, wondering what darkness still lurked in the corners of the world John had uncovered.